Okay. So what I have to say in this third session is that it is important, the very fact that I am in Florence. It's interesting to say that the population of Florence in the 15th century is more or less the same population that we have in Florence now. This means that Florence was very important by this moment when we can say that philosophy and science in some way re-encountered. In fact, we are here, of course. In fact, in this third session, art, thought, and experience, we have to see how these Neoplatonical ideas reached Florence in this very important moment of the history of Italian culture and the history of Italian Renaissance. Only through this we will be in a good position to talk about perspective, idealism, and science from this main idea of art, thought, and experience. This is the first page of a very important book which is preserved at the Laurentiana Library of Florence. I am from here 500 meters from this Laurentiana Library, which was founded by the famous Cosme the Old. Cosme the Old was the founder of the so-called dynasty of the Medicis. And Cosme the Old was a banker and was a merchant and was the head of the government of this city-state of Florence in these very beginnings of the 15th century. You will remember that we left all this topic in the Middle Ages. We review how the work of Plotinus helped the Roman painters to represent the early Christian art. We remember how this logos that was coming in the antiquity, the Greek antiquity, was coming from the mythos, from the stories. Now, in the Christian sense of culture, has been turned into the word of God that has become man. Now, medieval art is the representation of this symbolism, this man God, who is between Alpha and Omega. He is the owner of all space and time. And that, because of this, it is possible to consider the art of cathedrals, European cathedrals, as a symbol of the so-called heavenly Jerusalem, which is revealed by the Apocalypse, or the book of Revelation to Saint John, as a city in itself. This city, the cathedral, is beheaded by this Logos Christ. And now, in this Florence of the early 15th century, this Logos Christ is gonna become progressively again a Logos human eye, and a Logos progressively more rational and less symbolical, but a Logos likewise connected with this original nous, or first hypothesis, which will descend to the matter, passing through the soul, the intelligence, going to the matter, to the not being, and returning to the original sun. It is amazing how this man, Cosme of Medicis, immediately invited the Neoplatonic philosopher and theologist or theologian, Marsilius Ficinus. Marsilius Ficinus was a man who had studied the works of Saint Augustine, the Christian Neoplatonic. He knew about Proclus, the Roman Neoplatonic, as well as Plotinus. And because Cosme of Medicis wanted in some way to idealize himself, idealize his government, and he wanted Florence to be a kind of Platonic republic, he invited Marsilius Ficinus to found a new institution who was going to be called Platonic Academia. So it is incredible for me now to be in Florence, where a Platonic Academia was founded in the early 15th century. We have seen at the very beginning of these lectures this kind of intellectual convergence between Advaitism and Neoplatonism. It is incredible now to say that after many centuries, in the birth of modernity, we can have in Florence this new institution that regards the corpus Platonicum, and more indirectly for us, it is also regarding the corpus of the Upanishads, where in the philosophical system, everything, and religious system, everything is one. This is the page with the prologue, with a dedication by Marsilius Ficinus of his translation of the Aeneas of Plotinus, dedicated to Cosme of Medicis. It says, Prohimium Marsili Ficini Florentini in Libros Plotini. It says prologue of Marsilius Ficinus of Florence to the books of Plotinus ad magnanimum Laurentium Medicem Patriae Servatorem, to the great Lawrence, the magnificent father of the country and servant of the country. Lawrence the Magnificent was the first son of Cosmus of Medicis. And here we see this frontispiece of this dedication with the blazon of the Medicis here and different historical characters around with different symbolism. And here the M for the Magnus Cosmus of Medicis, And here in this angle, a portrait of Marsilius Ficinus himself. So this is the situation when Ghirlandaio for the chapel Tornabuoni of the same period wanted to portray in this scene of the annunciation of an angel to Zachariah, the future father of Saint John the Baptist. You see here in this corner how Marsilius Ficinus is talking to different other people. Here we see the same face than Marsilius Ficinus in this M of Magnus Cosmus of Medicis. So all of this is getting us back to the, in some way, Roman realistic art of portrait, where every character is himself. It is not an idealized art, but it's a very realistic art. Plotinus will comment as well, not only the work of, Marsilius Ficinus will comment as well, not only the work of Plotinus, but also the banquet by Plato on love, Commentarium Marsilii Ficini Florentini, again, to the banquet of Plato on love. So this is a manuscript of this very period that shows other works of Marsilio Ficino. Later on, Marsilio Ficino's Sopra lo amore of Veri convito di Platone. It is again a book, in this case, printed in Florence. And here at the right-hand side, again, Plotini Platonicorum Coryphei opera, quae extant omnia per celeberrium illum Marsilium Ficinum Florens. The works, the Corpus Platonicum, with all the works commented by the magnificent Marsilius Plotinus. This is in Basileia. And this is, has to lead us to think, what does it mean, the Marsilio Ficino experience in Neoplatonic system, the interest by Lawrence the Magnificent in founding the Platonic Academia in Florence, together with a sort of scientific realism and the study of experience, the study of Pythagorean philosophy as the philosophy of number, and the interest in science. I want to show you this through the work of perspective as the new invention in the year 1415 by the architect Brunelleschi, that I quoted, who I quoted in the last session, as the way of representing three-dimensional reality on a canvas or a panel, pictorial panel, with two dimensions. This is the art of perspective, a word that is coming from the Latin perspicere. Perspicere, the Latin perspicere, means to see through, to see through. So perspective means to see through. And what does it mean to see through in this very Neoplatonic atmosphere, where other artists, in this case like Leonardo da Vinci are working. Here we see a work by Leonardo da Vinci, the same author, as you know, of the Mona Lisa, which is in the Louvre, with the Adoration of the Magi, which is a work that was entrusted to Leonardo by the Augustinian monks of San Donato in Scopeto in Florence in 1481. This is an unfinished work because Leonardo, because he was so famous, he had to depart for Milan to the north of Florence the following year, leaving this painting unfinished. This painting is now in Florence, nearby the place from where I'm talking to you, and it represents precisely the Logos, the Christian Logos, who is, in this case, in the hands of his mother, Mary, and is visited by the three so-called kings. This is one king, this is another king, and this is the third king. This is a representation that in Greek is called Epiphanos, which means manifestation. In this case, the manifestation of people who were not Jewish, or people who were not Christian, even though without any religion, that to which the Logos Christ manifests himself. Around this first kind of triangle, we see different scenes, like people around, more or less talking all together, people who are intrigued, who are wondering, who is this Logos Christ? Because this is a so new thing that they are wondering about this. And even though at the very background, we see people battling and different scenes. No? In more detail, we see here to what extent this is unfinished. But we see the surprise, we see the expressionism around this very scene. We see the contrast between peace here, the horse, idealized in peace, and the battle among mankind. We also see people asking someone, what is happening here in this epiphany? And this someone pointing to heaven with his finger, no? Saying, well, all the explanation is above. The explanation to this is in heaven in some way. We see, even though philosophers around this scene, which represent the rational knowledge, sometimes the skepticism, and sometimes the passion, no, to see these new things. This is a very complex representation where, likewise, we see the new tree of the new Logos, which is the tree of salvation, and in some way, the old tree of the human sin, which is the past, the pagan past. With this new tree, in some way, the sacrifice of the cross of the Messiah Christ will be performed. Here again, to position you, the Madonna, we call the Madonna in Italy, so that we can understand the whole composition. Well, this is a very impressive painting that we can see and we can visit this week, even though presentially in the Museum of the Uffizi here nearby, which is accompanied by the preparatory study by Leonardo himself. How Leonardo prepared this work before deciding to paint this. This is the preparatory study of Leonardo to this painting. In this preparatory study, we see things like these staircases that we see here, the staircases, these double staircases. We see the horses revolving around, all these horses that we have seen here, as well as we see these arches, and these arches that become in the definite painting kind of maybe ruins or so. So if you now see the screen, you will see that there are some geometrical composition behind that has a center here, a geometrical center that has a line of horizon, which is the line of the human eye to see reality, and these so-called orthogonal lines. So if you continue to see this screen, you will see the transformation of this painting. We are here, so we go here and here and here and here, right? So it is the same painting. I repeat this visual movement. No? So this is the preparatory scheme, so that if we fix our eye here, we see how this evolves into the definitive painting, right? So what does this mean? No? Well, this means that, first of all, something which is quite interesting here is that the vanishing point of this work is not pointing to the Logos Christ, but it is pointing to this horse which is in the very background. This is a very important change, because in the Middle Ages, we had expected to have the vanishing point pointing to the head of Jesus Christ. So something of revolutionary in terms of ideas and categories is happening. This symbolical condition of geometry is going to be seen in many other paintings, no? Like here I am pointing in this star, no? This very fact, no? That the vanishing point is here and it is not in the head of Jesus Christ. And you see how there is a diversion of the attention from the geometrical perspective in comparison to the symbolism of Jesus Christ. As I said, this is something that we can see in other compositions, like the Hunt at the Forest by the Italian painter Paolo Uccello. You see here very easily, we see how it works, this vanishing point, how this painting is composed, let's say scientifically, in order to create this feeling of experience. Well, this is in some way pointing, we have seen the notion of perspective as this point that gives priority to space. This perspective is not centered in the symbolical idea of the Logos, but it is centered in how the human eye looks to reality. Now we have to see a second concept, which is the concept of golden ratio or golden proportion, and how this golden proportion is concerning, thanks to Neoplatonical ideas to this idealism of first Plotinus, then Proclus, then we said Augustine, then we said Dionysius the Areopagite, and all through the Middle Ages until now in Florence, Marsilius Ficinus. No? Let's see what does it mean, this golden ratio, because this ratio means the word reason and the word logos as well, and how this ratio can be of a golden condition, can be something perfect, can be something universal, and how this golden ratio, this universal logos, this universal reason, can concern this idealism. And we have to go again to, how this golden ratio is constructed. This is the sectio aurea, no? Where we see a rectangle which is divided through these proportions, 8, 5, 3, and how when dividing these, we can have another here, golden ratio, and when we divide this golden ratio, we find here again the golden ratio, which divided, it is again a golden ratio, which divided, it is again a golden ratio. So this is, you see, how this can be considered the classical golden sectio or golden ratio that later on has been explained out of Fibonacci, no? The famous Fibonacci series, no? Drawing this same golden ratio, or another different explanations that the modern and the contemporary physics has calculated to explain the same reality, right? So what does this mean for us? This means perfection. This is the form with which we are working now. And this form is very present, and this is why this is so golden or so sacred, because it is a proportion that is coming directly from nature. Here we see this example. We can see this of the monarchos butterfly. So we see in the wings of this butterfly, we see the same gold, very impressive. But how this golden ratio can be present in Florence in different works of art. We have seen regarding art and experience the work of Leonardo, the Adoration of the Magi. We have seen his preparatory drawings in order to explain the vanishing point and how through a vanishing point all the reality is explained in scientific terms. Now we step on the golden ratio, and we have to go, we could go to different works, but I want to present you the famous Patsy Chapel, designed by the Florentine architect Brunelleschi. Well, Brunelleschi is the inventor of the art of perspective. Now, Brunelleschi is working for the same patrons, the family Medicis, and more specifically, Lawrence the Magnificent. Brunelleschi works for this family, as is working Marsilio Ficino and many others, and he is entrusted a little funerary chapel in the church of San Lorenzo. This little chapel, I wanted to say, not because this is an ulterior example. I'm talking about not about San Lorenzo, but about the Church of the Holy Cross. The Patsy Chapel is in the Holy Cross. What is the Patsy Chapel? Let's see what is this. No? And the Patsy Chapel that we see here, this is the exterior of the Patsy Chapel, is a chapel located in the first cloister on the southern flank of the Basilica di Santa Croce in Florence, Italy. It is credited to Brunelleschi, as I said, and it is considered to be one of the masterpieces of Renaissance architecture. What we see here is, we see a symmetric temple with a little atrium, which is this little space between the exterior and the interior facade. This is with this big architrave, which is uniting the space, and this other architrave interrupted by this arch that gives support or is supported by this triple pair of columns. On this very architrave, another structure is built by Brunelleschi, which is a conical dome with a drum to give light to this interior. What is the relationship between this Patsy Chapel, the vanishing point of the perspective, and the golden ratio? This is what we want to see now. This is the interior of this dome, of this chapel. This is a model to make you understand the section of this portico, and as well as the proportion. This is a plaster cast contemporary model, but it's very useful to understand this space. And this is the interior. And while we see this, we realize that a sort of serenity, a sort of tranquility, and a sort of special proportion that is giving us a kind of easy understanding of what this space is. We see this architrave, which is following the exterior architrave. This is the main altar, and this is the dome. And this is what I wanted to show you in the very terms of the golden ratio. You see how this is the golden ratio, how again the golden ratio appears here again, and again it appears here, and how this golden ratio as kind of human understanding, an empirical understanding of this space, is altogether with the notion of vanishing point. This is us, this is the individual, how the human eye, as if it was this vanishing point of Leonardo in the Adoration of the Magi. Here, Brunelleschi is using this vanishing point to project all the space all together with the very notion of golden ratio. So this is how then it is working Platonic idealism with experience, science, and mathematics. In this other scheme, if you see the screen again, you will see how this is working. We are here, this is kind, so to say, Brunelleschi. This is the audience. This is our human eye that is embracing this visual range. This is thinking visually, because this is the title of our seminar, how proportions are working here in order to understand, again, the facade of the Cappella Patsy, the Patsy Chapel. This is again the Patsy Chapel with the point of view, with the vanishing point. And this is again the Patsy Chapel and how this is visually constructed. In the floor plan, this is of course the portico of the Patsy Chapel. This is the spectator who is embracing visually everything. And this is, here in this case, the logos is us. We are these logos that is dominating the entire space of composition. That's how Filippo Brunelleschi wanted to compose his facade for the Cappella Patsy, but also his Sagrestia Vecchia, the old sacristy of San Lorenzo, the church of San Lorenzo, and many other of his works. So this is leading us to how this is concerned to Plato, to Plotinus, and altogether how to connect in some way science to idealism, and how, in fact, this philosophy of Marsilio Ficino, in supporting of this system, this philosophical and religious idealism of Plotinus, of a center from which is the sun, from which it is coming the unus, the nous. It's coming through, as I said, through the human soul, the intelligence, the matter, and then they return to all things. No? But this is in this way, from the upper part of this first hypothesis to the lower part, it is generated some idealistic forms that are inspired in the so-called Platonic solids. And these are the Platonic solids. Platonic solids are these idealistic forms that, through the so-called regular geometry, can be constructed exclusively. So the solids of all the possibilities in the solid geometric forms with regular shapes. For example, this is a square which is regular. With a regular square, we can build up the cube. No? With a regular pentagon, we can build up only this. With a regular triangle, we can only build up this. So this is the way how Plato idealizes geometry and says, well, let's see whether these forms can be present in nature or not. And this idea of ideal solids is bringing us again to Florence. Here we see the already quoted Church of Saint Lawrence. This is the Church of Saint Lawrence. This is the mausoleum of the family Medicis. Here, the Medicis are buried, but for now we have to forget about this big piece of construction. We are here in this church where there are two relevant pieces of architecture. At the left-hand side, we see here at the left-hand side the old sacristy by Brunelleschi, which is very similar to the Patsy Chapel. And here at the right-hand side, this is the piece that we are now about to study. This is the new sacristy, where Lawrence the Magnificent and his brother Giuliano are buried nowadays. This is the same Lawrence the Magnificent who supported Marsilio Ficino, and this chapel was entrusted for building to Michelangelo Bonarotti, the architect of the dome of St. Peter to the Vatican, and the painter of the Sixtine Chapel in Rome. So Michelangelo Bonarotti has been appointed to build up this sacristy, which has a dome, which is a semicircular dome, and a so-called lantern, which is crowned by one of these Platonic solids. Let's see how, of course, this is the church with the shape of the cross. I remind you that this is the old sacristy by Brunelleschi, who plays with the sacristy of Michelangelo. This church is of the 13th century. Brunelleschi is 15th century, and Michelangelo is 16th century. This is, of course, one of the main buildings of Florence. And let me see, because there are some we have to silence some. Okay, now we are better. Yes. So I was telling you that this church of San Lorenzo with these two sacristies is in some way the church of the Medicis. This is the church where the family Medicis went to pray. And this is the church, the building, the sacred building that was paid by this family. In this section that I'm showing you right now, we can see the two sacristies, and this is important. This is the sacristy of Brunelleschi, and this is the sacristy of Michelangelo. This is the church of San Lorenzo, and we are going to study this sacristy, but very especially this solid, Platonic solid, which is crowning the lantern of this sacristy, following the Neoplatonic ideas of Marsilio Ficino, as well as of Michelangelo Bonarotti. This is the interior of the sacristy. I mean, this is an amazing space. I have been into this space these days. And this is the portrait of Lawrence of Magnificent. This is the tomb, the sepulchre of Florence the Magnificent. And all of this space has been designed by Michelangelo Bonarotti, as well as these sculptures made out by him at the early 16th century. This is another vision of Lorenzo de' Medici, the founder of the Platonic Academia entrusted to Marsilio Ficino. And you see how this is a spectacular space in its geometry, in its materials, and in its shape, right? This is the dome that is imitating the dome of the Roman Pantheon that I show you at the very beginning, with the Logos in the very center, whereas in this case, this is not the Logos Christ, but this is the mathematical Logos. And this is the exterior lantern on the very top of the dome by Michelangelo, which is crowned by this Platonic solid, this polyhedra, crowned by the Holy Cross. And these are the lions of the Pope Lion X, who was a pope belonging to the family of Medicis as well. At the left-hand side, we see this polyhedra and the beauty of this lantern in marble, white marble of Carrara. This is this very piece on the very top of this new sacristy. These are the lions of the Pope Leo, and this is the cross, right? What is this Platonic solid? Well, this is the famous Platonic solid made with 60 regular triangles. So this is a real ideal form. This is a real kind of Plotinian nous, which from the very top of this funerary space is creating, from the very top to the low, is creating reality, the reality until the death at the low parts of this emanation of power, emanation of energy, which is in return, will be in return to heaven, will be as this Plotinian condition, as this Neoplatonical thinking and religious thought, when we try to visualize art, philosophy, and religion. This is the real solid. So this is what was designed by Michelangelo in its process of restoration. And this form, from where it does come, it comes from Leonardo. This is a manuscript of Leonardo, who is describing these Platonic solids. You see this form, this shape, is the same shape that we see here. So Michelangelo Bonarotti has studied Leonardo. Of course, they are in the same city. Before Leonardo departed to Milan for this Forza, they are really in this atmosphere of that regards this relationship between the Neoplatonic ideas of Plotinus, translated by Marsilius Ficinus, and paid, sponsored by Lawrence the Magnificent in Florence. This Lawrence Magnificent, who is buried in this funerary temple built up by Michelangelo Bonarotti, which is crowned by one of these Platonic solids with 60 regular triangular faces that constitute this kind of golden ball, this kind of original sun, that in turn is philosophically and theologically creating realities from above to the lowest, that in turn the dead, the tombs, will return to the resurrection, the Christological resurrection, to the Logos at the very end. You see how this is a complex reality, but of course, this is the drawing by Leonardo of this so-called dodecaedron elevated solid. This is the drawing of Leonardo that has been imitated by Michelangelo in the new sacristy, which is regarding this deep idealism, which is between philosophy, religion, and arts. We wonder who was this Michelangelo Bonarotti. We know that Michelangelo Bonarotti was later on called by Julius II, the Pope Julius II, and later on the Pope Sixtus V to Rome, first of all to paint the ceiling of the Capella Sixtina, later on the scene of the final judgment in this same Capella Sixtina, and later on he was called to crown the huge church of St. Peter of Rome with the dome of St. Peter on the structure designed by Bramante. This is our Michelangelo. This is the Michelangelo of the Pietà of Michelangelo. This is the Michelangelo of the slaves. This is the Michelangelo of the Julius II for the funerary monument for Julius II. And this same Michelangelo is the Michelangelo of Florence, the poet who wrote these sonnets, the sonnets of Michelangelo, that reveal a very clear connection to the Platonic Academia of Florence, to Marsilio Ficino, and to Lawrence of Medici the Magnificus. These sonnets sound as follows. No? We know the manuscripts of Michelangelo with these sonnets, but he makes a dedication to Vittoria Colonna with this madrigal, of course in Italian, but I wanted to bring a translation who says, "Be sure, my eyes, you know quick time goes by and the dread hours draws near. Soon to forbid your grieving tears to fall, may mercy spare you though, while my divine one's here." You see here, my divine one's here. This is a direct quote to Plotinus. Dining to life on earth with us at all, if grace breach heaven's wall for every blessed one, and this my living son is again a reference to this Platonic polyedra, which represents the sun, the nous, the first Plotinian hypostasis. And this my living son, leaving us here, returns to heaven. This is a reference to the return to the first hypostasis of all things, as is postulating Western Neoplatonism as well as Eastern Advaitism. Then what's left on earth you would care to see again? Well, this is how I have had the pleasure of enjoying of this seminar from myth to logos, first with a complex comparison between our Western Neoplatonism and your Hinduistic Advaitism, a second lecture on theology and the visual arts, where we have seen this kind of strange relationship between arts and Neoplatonism, and how this logos has been turned into a man who is God at the same time, and that gives birth to the Christian art. To what extent Plotinus helps to Roman painters to synthesize the first Christian images, and how all this is developed through the Corpus Areopagiticum and the works of Saint Augustine, especially Confessions, in the great Summa Theologica in architecture of European medieval cathedrals, and now today in this session with art, thought, and experience with the arrival of Neoplatonism to Florence, the foundation of Plato's Academy, and the Italian Renaissance, with all these magnificent works of Leonardo, Brunelleschi, and Michelangelo Bonarotti that are regarding the great character of Marsilio Ficino as the translator of the Aeneas of Plotinus. Thank you very much. I hope you have enjoyed, and I remain open to your questions.
Thank you, Professor Alfons. Thank you once again. You have just offered a summary of the 3 lectures from myth to logos, theology and the visual arts, art, thought, and experience. So now we can leave open for some comments, some questions. I think there's already one question on the chat. And the audience, please, any other clarification you would like to get, you can ask directly or through the chat.
Yes, it says, dear professor, you have shown us Fibonacci series to achieve the forms. While in university, we have also studied Laplace, Fourier series, etc. as well, which would suggest a good text which mentions about these golden ratios, art, form, and mathematics, all in one included, would be quite interesting to read. Thank you. Okay. Yes, let me show you this work by, it's called okay, let me help you with this. Give me 1 minute. Yeah. Yes, I have found this thing that you ask. Let me see in English. Okay. I got it. I'm going to show it to everybody because this is an important work. Okay. Okay. Yes. So let me show you this. Let me see it in Zoom. Because in some way, okay, I'm here. Yes. Sorry for this, because sometimes it is difficult to have a reference like that in mind, but it is then doesn't appear here. Okay, I cannot, because technically this is now a bit tricky. Okay. Well, I will have to provide for you just the reference because I cannot visualize the image of this book, right? So let me retry because
the title and the author would be enough in any case.
Okay, I think you see it now. No? Do you see this? Do you see this image?
Yes.
So it says the geometry of art and life, Matila Jika, right? Now, this is a book that explains very well all this topic, right? And it talks about how, yes, the series of Fibonacci is present in nature, and what is the regard of this series of Fibonacci and other mathematical series with art. That's why it says the geometry of art and life. Even though when the Swiss architect Le Corbusier went to India for building, do you remember what is the name of this place in India where Le Corbusier built up?
Chandigarh?
Chandigarh, that's right. So when Le Corbusier was invited to build up the city of Chandigarh, he used this work of Matila Jika for all the problems with geometry and art. So this really means that it is an important topic. This is an important topic, okay? I think, yes, this is the answer. More questions?
One question, Professor Alfons, when we, in the history of Western art, you have that period in the 8th century of the iconoclast, that tendency that was leading to remove any type of art or representation in any sacred place. Somehow, how was this battle, we can say, overcome? Because from a tendency to deny the possibility of any religious representation, there was an evolution towards the Renaissance and the Florence art that you have showed us today.
Yes. Thank you very much, Professor Mariano. This is a very important question because here the big challenge in every religion is to say, well, if God is so big, can we represent God? Is it not a heresy to represent God? In fact, for example, in the Hebraic revelation, it is said, you will not represent God. And we don't have, in some way, we don't have Jewish art representing God. So why Christianity wants to represent God? Because the message of Christianity is that this logos that cannot be represented, if this logos become a human person, then we can start representing God. And this is the big paradox of Christian art, that God, being in some way in the mystery, being God hidden, being God the most unspeakable, being God's silence, then Christianity wants to represent God. Okay? This is the fact of history. But even though within Christianity, there have been some iconoclastic movements inside Christianity. For example, in the 8th century of the modern era, there was a current of Christians in Orient that denied the possibility of representing God in Christianity. And this was called the Iconoclasm, and the cult to images was removed, and many images were destroyed, Christian images were destroyed by Christians, until it was built up a theological argument to say, well, we have to point the difference between the representation of God and in wood or in marble or in stone or in painting, to point the distinction between the representation of God and the presence of God. Okay? Because if a sacred image is presence of God, Christians said this is idolatry. Okay? So there have been different crises. No? Another crisis, and very important, which was with the reform of Luther, of Martin Luther. The reform of Martin Luther wanted also to remove the cult to images, the cult to saints, and even though the cult to the Mother of God, because he didn't want representations, right? I have to say, Professor Mariano, that in some way, at least in Western culture, we are living in this globalization. We are living in a very iconoclastic period, where the image of God is hidden, and only our image is shown through Facebook, through Instagram, through tweet, through the screen, and through internet. So if you see internet, you will not see the image of God. You will see the image of man. We have to think all of this to where is pointing, no? Because image is an expression of ideas. This is what we are meant to learn in this seminar, no? That image, that there is a visual thinking. No? We can think so that things become visual. Thank you for your question.
Welcome.
More questions?
If there is nobody in the queue, could I ask one?
Yes, Dr. Somaiya.
So this is a little bit specific, and I ask actually on behalf of a participant who couldn't join today for some reason, and they've sent me a question to ask on their behalf. Apparently in 2010 or so, in the Sistine Chapel behind a painting of Leonardo, some layers of other earlier things were discovered which give a lot of representation to the anatomy. And there was some speculation or maybe research that he is trying in that part to use visual metaphors which are linked to Plato's allegory of the cave. Is there some light you could shed on this, and if there is any reading materials on this? Again, it need not be done now, but the reading material we could always connect on email. But if you could shed some light on this particular event and the uncovering of layers, I think it is the shedding the light and darkness. One second, I'll just get the message. It says the separation of light from darkness, that particular painting. Some layers were found beneath it, which reveal quite great detail of human anatomy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Here, if I understand this question properly, there is an overlapping between ideas and techniques.
Mm-hmm.
Because as far as I understand, this person or this student or professor is talking about how to layer images and to overlap images in the first plane, second plane, third plane. Is this one part of this question?
No, I think what the question is more that in what was uncovered as the hidden layers, there seemed to be visually some metaphor for Plato's, from Plato's allegory of the cave.
And in the 16th cover, what is uncovered in the 16th
chapel? It is in that painting of a separation of light and darkness. In that particular section, apparently some hidden layers were discovered.
Ah, okay.
Yeah. And those layers have some metaphor, is what is the question, if I also understand it correctly.
Okay. Let's see. What could be the relationship between this particular scene of the 16th chapel and the allegory of the cave in Plato? This scene of the separation between light and dark is a scene that is written in the book of Genesis, which is it is the first book of the Hebrew Bible, and it is the first book of the Christian Bible as well. And this is one of the days when God created the sun, and in creating the sun, he separated light from darkness. Okay, so this is a cosmic representation of God's creation, right? So the idea here is not a Greek idea. It's not a Platonic idea. It is a Judeo-Christian idea that God is able to create out of nothing, and that at the beginning there was nothing, and God created the sun, the light, and the darkness. Okay? This is what we see in the Sistine Chapel, because Michelangelo read the Genesis and wanted to represent this. Okay. What is the meaning of the allegory of cave in Plato? Well, the meaning of the allegory of cave in Plato is different, because the sun is outside the cave. The sun is in the sky. Then there is a fire. And in the door of the cave goes down. And down the cave, we have some people chained. They are slaves. They are chained. And they are watching to the background wall of this cave, right? Between these people and the exterior with the fire and the sun, there are other individuals that have little figures that are projected in this background of the cave, right? So Plato says that that material reality is like these shadows that are projected in the background of the cave, thanks to the fire outside the cave and thanks to the sun in the sky. So this is what Plato is saying with this allegory. So he says that material reality for him has not value, and that here on earth, what we only see is appearances. Appearances of what? Appearances of ideas. Ideas which are these figures that, thanks to the light of the sun, are projected in the very background of the cave. Now, what could be the relationship between this Sistine Chapel, scene and the cave of Plato? I think they are two different allegories. The Sistine Chapel allegory is that God separates light from darkness because he is creator. And the allegory of cave is a metaphysics that tries to explain that the most real of the real is the sun. It is not these shadows projected in the very background on a screen inside the earth. Okay, so in some way, both allegories are metaphysical or theological, because the allegory of the Sistine Chapel says that God is the only one, whereas Plato, with his allegory of the cave, says that the sun is God and is the only one. So here there is maybe a little of parallel things.
Thank you.
Oh, more things. Well, if there are no more questions, I have to say that I have been really very happy to be with you along these three weeks. And I understand that it is tough to be at a so long distance, no? But I have felt, just thinking all together, no? I have felt myself very close, even though physically, with you, and that I hope that when all this pandemia can finish, I can visit you in person to keep thinking about all of these topics and keep learning out from you, right? Thank you very much, Professor, and to your institution and to Somaiya University. And I hope that we will see you very soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor. It was an absolute pleasure to be part of this, to have you teaching us this. For several of us, as we had discussed before, Neoplatonism is a new idea, and it was wonderful how you took us through this, and art as a medium of expressing philosophical concepts. It was a visual treat and an intellectual treat, and we look forward to doing this again. And you know, you are welcome to Mumbai, to our campus anytime. It would be a pleasure. Dr. Iturbe, if
Yes.
you would like to have a few last words.
Perfect. Yes. Thank you, Dr. Raiza. Well, Professor Alfons, thank you very, very much. Really have been three wonderful lectures, 3 wonderful weeks in which we have learned a lot, all of us, and you have managed to transmit all this knowledge about art, all this knowledge about Neoplatonism and the relationship among them in a simple language and a very profound language. So really, we're very grateful. I know that for you has been a big effort also, because you are engaged in some research work in Florence, but you managed to dedicate time for us and for this activity. So yes, we look forward to have you here in India and in Bombay at Somaiya Vidyavihar whenever is possible. So thank you very much. We hope that we will continue in the future.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye. Stay safe, and we meet soon. Namaste.
Thank you.
Namaste.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.